The voice came before the face. Resident code required. Unauthorized vehicle detected. It echoed through the pine trees like a machine trying to sound human. For a second, I thought my GPS had lost its mind. But no, this was the same dirt road my grandfather carved with a shovel and a dream. Only now, there was a steel barrier where memory used to live. A gate, tall, silver, mechanical, like something out of a movie that forgot what home means. And then she appeared, tearing down the hill in a spotless golf cart, hair perfectly curled, sunglasses flashing. She slammed the brakes like she owned the world. "You're trespassing," she snapped. "This is private property. Private property." My blood went still. I reached for the old envelope on my dashboard, the one ID carried across 3 deployments and 12 time zones. Inside it, the original deed. My grandfather's name. My family's name. Mine. When I held it up, something shifted in her eyes. That kind of fear people have when they realize their lies just met the truth. For 3 years, while I was half a world away building roads for strangers, she was here building walls around my past. She renamed our home Willowbrook Estates, installed cameras, rules, and a $2,000 gate like she was protecting gold. Charged my elderly neighbors $50 just to visit their grandkids. She even pointed those security lenses right into the windows of my cabin, the same cabin where my father once taught me how to fish. It wasn't just theft, it was erasure. She wasn't taking land, she was taking roots. And in that moment, with the cold metal humming between us, something inside me rewired. See, war teaches you many things, but the most important lesson is this: you don't fight for dirt, you fight for meaning. She thought she'd stolen a property. She had no idea she'd just awakened a soldier who had nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. I didn't drive there to start a fight, but when I left that gate, I was already planning a war, not out of anger, but out of love for everything that gate tried to erase. Because that gate wasn't just blocking my driveway, it was blocking every veteran who has ever come home to find their life rewritten by someone else. And I was about to teach the world what happens when you push a fighter too far. Her name was Deirdre Hutchinson, though she introduced herself later like she expected applause. Back then, I only knew her as the woman who stood between me and everything I loved. When I returned from overseas, I carried one thing heavier than my rucksack: hope. Hope that home would feel the same. Hope that the world I'd fought for still existed somewhere beyond the paperwork, the politics, and the noise. But hope can be fragile. One wrong signature, and it shatters. While I was dodging sandstorms and counting the days until I'd see my family again, she'd been here, repaving my grandfather's road into something she called Willowbrook Estates. Stone pillars, a gate that blinked like a robot's eye, cameras tracking every breath. She'd rewritten the soul of this place with money, mirrors, and self-importance. Neighbors whispered her name like a curse. Some said she was revitalizing the area. Others just avoided her. The way you avoid lightning, you never know who it's going to strike next. I learned she'd come here after a messy divorce, carrying bitterness like luggage she refused to unpack. She bought the ugliest mansion on the lake, concrete walls pretending to be elegance, and decided the rest of us were beneath her design. To her, our cabins weren't homes. They were obstacles to her view. And in that twisted mind of hers, my land was the crown jewel, the piece she needed to complete her empire. But she didn't just steal my access road. She rewrote the entire story of who I was, told the neighbors I died overseas, told them the property was abandoned, even told them she was managing it until the government figured out what to do with it. Imagine coming home after 3 years of service and finding out your own community thinks you're a ghost. For a moment, anger almost took me. But the uniform had taught me discipline, and discipline whispered, "Don't shout, strategize." So I listened, watched, collected pieces of her puzzle. Because when someone builds their castle on lies, all you need is patience. The truth will knock it down for you. That night, sitting on the hood of my truck under the fading sunset, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't let rage win. I'd win through clarity, through courage, through proof. Because some battles aren't fought with bullets, they're fought with truth. One document won, but I had no idea how deep her deception went, or how far she'd fall trying to keep it hidden. The next morning, the first crack in her empire appeared. And it started with a single letter that smelled like perfume and war. It arrived 3 days after I came home. A thick envelope, perfumed like desperation trying to smell expensive. The label read, Willowbrook Estates Management Office. My family's mailbox, once filled with letters from cousins, fishing invites, and old photographs, now carried threats dressed in formal ink. I tore it open on the hood of my truck, the morning fog still clinging to the lake. Inside were 8 pages of legal nonsense, all stamped, highlighted, and designed to intimidate. Words like violations, fees, and compliance assessments leapt off the page like bullets aimed at my sanity. $3,600 in unpaid community assessments. $500 for emergency gate installation. $200 for an unauthorized structure review. My grandfather's tool shed. Unauthorized. His compost pile. Environmental hazard. Our family cabin. Non-compliant dwelling. I almost laughed. The kind of laugh you give when something's too insane to process, half disbelief, half rage. She'd used real laws, twisted, stretched, and mangled to create an empire that existed only in her imagination. The Minnesota Planned Community Act was meant to protect homeowners, not weaponize power against them. But in Deirdre's hands, it became her declaration of war. For a brief second, I imagined what Grandpa would have done. He was a man who solved problems with a handshake and a coffee pot, not a lawsuit. But he also believed in justice, the kind that doesn't blink in the face of arrogance. So instead of getting angry, I got strategic. I spent the next few days quietly learning everything I could about property law, HOAs, and county records. I wasn't going to fight her with rage. I was going to fight her with evidence. I drove to the courthouse, walked past rows of dusty files, and found what I was looking for: proof that Willowbrook Estates didn't legally exist. No registration, no board, no license. Just one woman pretending to be an empire. That's when it hit me. She hadn't just broken the law. She'd underestimated the wrong man. I folded the fake invoices back into the envelope, tucked it into my jacket, and whispered to myself, "You just wrote your own downfall, Deirdre. You just don't know it yet." The fire had started. Not from anger, but from purpose. And once purpose burns, it doesn't go out. Because that letter wasn't a threat, it was an invitation. And I was about to RSVP with everything she never saw coming. If you're still here and feeling that spark, hit subscribe. This story's just getting started, and trust me, the next part burns hotter than this letter ever did. The courthouse smelled like paper and time, that old heavy air that carries secrets in every breath. As I walked down those echoing corridors, I realized this wasn't just a building. It was a battlefield of signatures and stamps. And I was about to find the weapon I needed. For 2 days straight, I lived between filing cabinets. My hands turned gray from dust and carbon copies. But then I found it, a thin folder that shouldn't have existed. Inside, road reclassification forms signed by a county clerk who probably hadn't realized he'd been tricked. Deirdre Hutchinson had somehow convinced the county to label my family's access road as the main entrance to her fake community. In one sneaky document, she'd rewritten my family's history, and she'd done it while I was still serving overseas. But there was more. Digging through her so-called property management paperwork, I discovered that she'd never filed a single HOA formation record. Not one. The entire operation, The gate, the fees, the fake inspections was nothing more than a performance wrapped in bureaucracy. She wasn't an HOA president. She was an actress starring in her own illusion. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. 7 families charged for road maintenance that never happened. Invoices for services that didn't exist. Money disappearing into accounts under her name. And all of it hidden behind the mask of community improvement. Every page I turned felt heavier than the last. It wasn't just about me anymore. This woman was bleeding the entire neighborhood dry, preying on the elderly and the trusting. When I finally stepped outside, the sunlight hit my face like a promise. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. I felt purposeful. Because this wasn't just about reclaiming land. It was about defending people who didn't even realize they were under attack. That night, I brewed a pot of coffee, spread the documents across my cabin table, and stared at the map of what she'd built. Every forged signature, every missing record, every lie. It all connected. Deirdre wasn't the queen of Willowbrook Estates. She was the architect of her own downfall. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Because once you know the truth, you can turn it into justice. And justice, when it arrives, doesn't knock softly. But before I could make my move, she struck first, and this time she didn't come with paperwork. She came with rumors, fear, and a plan to destroy my name before I could speak a single word. It started with whispers. The kind that flowed through small towns faster than smoke on a windy day. By the time I walked into the local grocery store, the looks had already changed. Curiosity, pity, fear. That's when I knew Deirdre had begun her next attack. She didn't use bullets this time. She used stories. The first came through a neighbor, a trembling old man who didn't know what to believe anymore. He pulled me aside, eyes heavy with guilt. "Marcus, is it true? Did you threaten her?" That single question felt heavier than any weapon I'd ever carried. Deirdre had created an online group called the Willowbrook Estates Community Watch. In it, she posted edited security footage of me driving up to my own cabin, cut to look like an angry veteran charging at her gate. The caption read, "Unstable individual with military training threatening peaceful families. Authorities have been notified." She turned my service into a warning label, turned my discipline into danger. And the worst part, people believed her. Within hours, I'd become the villain of my own story. The phone calls started. Neighbors who once waved across the lake stopped answering. Even the local sheriff dropped by just to check in, his voice polite but eyes suspicious. For the first time, I understood what real isolation felt like, not distance, but doubt. When a lie spreads faster than truth, silence becomes your only ally. But silence doesn't mean surrender. While she played victim on Facebook, I set up trail cameras on my property. Quiet, patient, unblinking. And soon enough, they caught what words couldn't. Her landscapers dumping trash on my shoreline. Her crew hammering new private property signs deep inside my land. And once, Deirdre herself, walking through my woods at midnight, flashlight in hand, filming evidence for her next post. She thought she was building a story that would destroy me. But what she was really doing was writing her own confession. I stared at the footage that night, the reflection of my screen flickering across the cabin walls, and I made a promise I could feel in my bones. You want war? Fine. But this one won't be fought with lies, it'll be fought with proof. And proof, unlike gossip, doesn't fade with time. It only grows louder. Because the next move I made would turn her whispers into alarms, and for the first time, she'd realize the truth was watching her back. The night the lies stopped scaring me was the night I turned my cabin into a command post. A single lamp on the table, stacks of papers lined like battle plans, and a laptop screen glowing against the darkness, every flicker of light reflecting the fire that had replaced my anger. She thought she was watching me, but she forgot that soldiers learn to see what others overlook. While Deirdre filled social media with panic and pity, I was collecting evidence, grain by grain. The trail cameras I'd hidden in the trees caught her workers dumping fertilizer into the lake. Another camera picked up her security patrols trespassing past midnight, spray painting new signs deeper into my woods. Every clip told a story her mouth couldn't twist. Then came the paper trail. Bank statements, contractor invoices, and falsified HOA letters. Each document had one thing in common: money going in, nothing coming out, no maintenance, no repairs, no legitimate business. Just greed wearing lipstick and perfume. I took everything to Sarah Justice, my neighbor, my friend, and one of the few attorneys in the county who still believed the law was supposed to mean something. She flipped through the files, eyes narrowing with every page. She's running a fake organization, Marcus. Every cent she's collected is criminal fraud. This isn't civil anymore. This is prison time. That was the first time I felt real hope. Not the fragile kind that wishes things would change, the kind that acts. Because when truth is on your side, you stop reacting and start moving. We formed a quiet alliance, Sarah, me, and a few brave neighbors who were tired of paying for their own humiliation. Mike from the bait shop, Gladys from the corner house, even Tom and his wife from down the hill. People who'd been silent for too long, finally realizing silence was feeding the problem. Every night, we met at my cabin, drinking burnt coffee and swapping evidence like intelligence agents. The mood wasn't fear anymore. It was focus. She thought she was fighting a man, but she was actually fighting a community waking up. The next step was clear. Take the proof where it mattered, to the county, the state, the courts. But before we could act, she did something none of us expected. She crossed a line even her lies couldn't protect. Because just when we were ready to reveal her fraud, Deirdre made a move so reckless, so cruel. It turned a property dispute into a personal war, and this time, she aimed straight at my past. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of calm morning that pretends nothing bad could ever happen. But peace doesn't last long when someone's desperate enough to weaponize your name. I woke to 17 notifications on my phone. Each one carried a different version of the same lie. Deirdre had gone public, and this time she'd aimed below the belt. She'd called a news station, told them I was a dangerous veteran suffering from severe PTSD, said I'd threatened families, damaged property, and screamed at her through the gate. She even claimed she feared for her life. Within hours, the story spread online. Headlines twisting my service into suspicion. Unstable soldier terrorizes peaceful lake community. There it was, plastered across screens like a scar that wouldn't heal. That's the cruel thing about lies. They don't need proof to spread. They just need fear. By noon, the sheriff was back on my doorstep. His hand hovered near his belt as he asked me to stay calm while they conducted a welfare check. Calm. That word hit harder than any accusation. But I stayed composed. Years in uniform had trained me for pressure far worse than gossip and cameras. So I invited them in, showed them the footage, the invoices, the proof. One deputy lingered behind after the others left. His voice softened. "I served too," he said. "Don't let them turn your medals into a weapon against you." And that's when I realized what this really was, not an attack on my property, but on my identity. She couldn't win the legal war, so she tried to erase the soldier inside me. Make the town believe that courage was chaos, that discipline was danger. But here's the thing about truth. It doesn't panic. It prepares. And I wasn't about to let her rewrite my story, not when others were watching how I respond. I called my old commanding officer, told him everything. By that evening, he'd connected me with the JAG office, and a military lawyer named Captain Rodriguez was already digging into Deirdre's false reports. He promised accountability. And when military lawyers promise, they deliver. That night, sitting on the porch overlooking the black mirror of the lake, I felt something shift inside me again. They could question my honor. They could smear my name, but they'd never understand what makes a soldier stand back up after being hit. Because when someone tries to bury your truth, the best revenge is to make it grow roots. And I was about to plant mine in the one place she couldn't reach, the law. If this moment hit you, if you've ever had to defend your name against lies, hit subscribe. The next chapter isn't just about survival. It's about turning the entire war upside down. The first rule of any battle: know your terrain. In war, it's the land. In life, it's the truth. By now, I'd mapped every inch of hers: the forged paperwork, the fake fees, the neighbors she'd manipulated, even the clerk she'd fooled. But this fight wasn't going to be won with anger. It would be won with precision. We called it Operation Justice, half joke, half promise. Every night, our little alliance met around my cabin table. Me, Sarah, Mike, and a few brave souls who were done being quiet. Old wood creaked beneath stacks of evidence, and the glow of our laptop screens made it feel like a mission briefing rather than a neighborhood meeting. Sarah spread out legal codes across the table like a general laying out battle plans. "Here's where she slipped," she said, tapping the pages. "She can't collect community fees without state registration. Every invoice she sent? Fraud. Every dollar she took? Evidence." Mike leaned back, shaking his head. "She's been bleeding us dry for 2 years. Time to make her pay for every nail in that fake gate." That's when I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was our redemption. I remembered my grandfather's words when I was a boy, hammering boards beside him on that same deck. "Son, good wood and good men have one thing in common: pressure only makes them stronger." He was right, because every lie she told only strengthened our resolve. We filed official complaints with the county, submitted proof to the state's revenue office, even connected with veteran legal groups who'd seen scams like this before. And for the first time, her silence became the loudest confession of all. Deirdre had built her kingdom on intimidation, but now her empire was surrounded, not by soldiers, but by truth. The next step was the courtroom, but she wasn't going to go quietly. Rumor had it she was making new threats, calling lawyers, bribing officials, even planning to double down with one final lie big enough to drown the truth completely. I knew what was coming. I'd seen that look in the eyes of cornered enemies before. Desperation, and desperation always makes mistakes. Because when the storm finally hit, it wouldn't be her voice echoing through this town. It would be the sound of everything she de-built collapsing, one truth at a time. There's a silence that comes before every storm, the kind that makes you feel the air tighten, like the world is holding its breath. That's how it felt the morning Deirdre made her final move. The first sign was the letter. Not the kind sealed with glue and logic, but with venom. It came from a fake company called Hutchinson Property Management, LLC, claiming I owed $8,900 in community violations. The paper looked official, stamped, and signed, but it was built on nothing but desperation. 2 hours later, the real hit came. A call from the state environmental agency. Someone had filed a report claiming my grandfather's septic system was leaking toxins into the lake, a danger to public health. They scheduled an inspection. Potential fines, $10,000. That someone didn't need to be named. I already knew her handwriting, even when it was typed. And then came the call that cut deeper than any lie before. My commanding officer from Fort Bragg, the man who de-led me through fire and kept my team alive. His tone was calm, but I heard the concern underneath. "Marcus, a woman called the base, claimed you're unstable, that you've been making threats. Said you might be a danger to civilians." For a long second, I couldn't breathe. Not because I was scared, but because I finally understood how far she was willing to go. She wasn't just trying to steal my land anymore. She was trying to erase my honor. There's a line you don't cross. Not with a soldier. Not with a man who has buried friends for the same flag you are now using as a weapon. But rage wasn't going to win this fight. Truth was. So I called Captain Rodriguez, my contact at the JAG office. He didn't just listen, he activated. By sunset, a military legal team was documenting every false claim she'd made. Because filing fake mental health reports about active service members isn't concern. It's a felony. For the first time since this war began, I wasn't standing alone. Behind me stood the Army, the law, and the truth. Three forces that don't break under pressure. That night, lightning cracked over the lake as I stood on the porch of my grandfather's cabin. I watched the storm roll in, dark clouds twisting like the chaos she decreated, and I realized something powerful. The storm wasn't coming for me. It was coming for her. Because when the thunder finally broke, the world would see who was really unstable, and justice was about to make landfall. The morning of the county hearing felt heavier than any deployment briefing I'd ever walked into. Not because I was afraid, but because this time, the mission was personal. The courthouse parking lot was already full. Reporters, neighbors, even people from the next county over. They'd all come to see the showdown between a soldier and a self-made suburban tyrant. I arrived early, wearing the same steady calm I'd carried through every storm overseas. In my hand, the folder that held months of truth, photos, invoices, recordings, every lie turned into evidence. Sarah met me at the entrance. Her voice was quiet, but her eyes were steel. "This is it, Marcus. You ready?" I nodded. Always. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. Deirdre sat across the room, dressed like she was attending a board meeting instead of her own collapse. Her lawyer, the kind who looked more like a magician than an attorney, kept whispering to her, but she wasn't listening. She stared straight at me, still clinging to the fantasy that her arrogance could outshine the truth. When her turn came, she spoke first. "Your Honors, this man has terrorized our community. He's unstable, dangerous, and refuses to comply with our lawful HOA standards." Every word dripped with practiced pity. The trembling voice, the crocodile tears, the performance of a lifetime. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, almost. Then Sarah stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The sound of truth doesn't need volume, it just needs timing. She placed our folder on the table and began reading. Line by line, fake invoices, forged signatures, unregistered HOA documents, screenshots of her posts, and finally, the recordings of her admitting to collecting money she never reported. Every gasp in the room was a nail in her illusion. When Sarah finished, she stepped aside, and I stood to speak. I didn't talk about laws or anger. I talked about home. About a grandfather who believed hard work was sacred. About neighbors who used to help each other fix docks instead of breaking them with fees. And about what happens when good people stop letting bullies write the rules. When I held up my grandfather as original deed, his signature faded but still proud, the entire room went still. Even the reporters lowered their cameras. That moment wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration. Deirdre's face drained of color as the county attorney stood and announced the verdict. All claims made by Ms. Hutchinson are fraudulent. Immediate forfeiture of unauthorized fees, investigation for embezzlement, and removal of the illegal gate effective immediately. It was over. The empire of arrogance had fallen, not by force, but by fact. As I walked outside into the sunlight, I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace. The kind that comes when truth finally breathes again. But what came after the verdict was even more powerful, because tearing down her walls was just the beginning. What we built in their place would change everything. The sound of justice wasn't a gavel. It was the rumble of machinery tearing down the gate that had divided us. A week after the verdict, county trucks rolled in. Engines roared, steel clanged, and piece by piece, that polished prison of metal and ego came down. The fake stone pillars cracked under the weight of truth, falling like monuments to arrogance. Neighbors gathered along the dirt road, watching as the last chunk of concrete hit the ground. No one cheered. We didn't need to. The silence spoke louder: relief, gratitude, closure. I stood by the old pine tree where Grandpa used to hang the fishing nets. For the first time in years, I could see the lake unobstructed. It shimmered under the morning sun, wide, open, and free again. Deirdre's house sat quiet across the water. Empty windows, no more cameras, no more noise. She'd left the lake the way she found it, except now her name meant nothing here. But this story wasn't about her anymore. It was about us. Mike reopened his bait shop that same weekend. Gladys started her garden again, planting sunflowers where the no trespassing signs used to be. Sarah and I spent hours at the cabin, sanding the old wood, restoring what time and conflict had worn down. Every nail we hammered wasn't just repair, it was redemption. We rebuilt the deck exactly the way Grandpa had designed it. Sturdy, honest, simple. No gates, no locks, just trust. That summer, the lake came alive again. Children splashing in the shallows, neighbors grilling together, music echoing over the water, the way it used to be. And that is when it hit me. The greatest victories don't come from destroying villains. They come from restoring what villains tried to take, from turning scars into blueprints for something stronger. The road once called Willowbrook Estates got its real name back, Brennan Road. A small wooden sign, carved by hand, nailed to the same post my grandfather planted decades ago. Not flashy, not modern, just real. As I watched the sun dip behind the trees that evening, I realized something profound. I hadn't just gotten my land back. I'd found my purpose again. But the real legacy wasn't mine alone. Because what started as one man's fight was about to become a movement, one that would reach far beyond Lake Thornton. Justice had been served, but peace isn't the end of a story. It is the beginning of a new one. The gate was gone, the road was ours again, and the neighbors who once lived in fear now laughed freely. But late one night, sitting on my grandfather's rebuilt porch, I realized something that chilled and inspired me at the same time. If this could happen to me, a soldier with training, discipline, and resources, what about the families who couldn't fight back? What about the veterans overseas right now, trusting that their homes are safe while they serve? That thought wouldn't let me sleep, so I built something out of it. I called it Operation Homecoming, a program to protect deployed veterans and their families from property scams, fake HOAs, and predatory developers. It started small, just a few volunteers, a website, and a mission. But within weeks, stories began pouring in. A Marine in Texas whose farm was being rezoned without consent. A widow in Ohio whose house was nearly sold by a fake executor. Each story a battle, each victory another spark. Sarah handled the legal coordination, Mike organized fundraising through fishing tournaments, and Gladys, sweet, steady Gladys, ran our community outreach with cookies and wisdom. Before long, we weren't just fixing one neighborhood. We were teaching others how to defend theirs. We created online toolkits showing people how to check land records, verify HOAs, and document property violations. We built partnerships with veteran legal networks. And one by one, we watched frightened homeowners turn into fearless defenders of their own rights. Every time I saw another gate come down, another veteran reclaim their home, I felt Grandpa's spirit in the wind that rolled across Lake Thornton. Not proud of the fight, proud of the follow-through. Because protecting something once is survival. Protecting others with what you've learned, that's legacy. A year later, I stood on that same porch, watching the sunset pour gold across the water. The lake was calm again, but the mission was alive. And as the loons called out across the evening air, I finally smiled. The road back home had been long, but it led exactly where it was supposed to, toward purpose. Because sometimes, victory isn't the end of war. It's the beginning of healing. And the world is full of gates waiting to be torn down. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Join me and let's keep building a world where truth stands taller than fear and no one ever loses their home to deceit again. The seasons turn slowly after that, the kind of quiet time where the earth remembers how to breathe again. Winter came, brushing frost over the lake, the same water that had witnessed every chapter of my fight. The snow softened the scars of the land, and for the first time in years, the air didn't carry tension. It carried peace. Some mornings, I'd wake before dawn and watch the mist lift off the water. That's when I'd hear him, my grandfather's voice carried in the creak of the boards, the rustle of the trees. Not words, exactly, just presence. The kind that reminds you you're standing on the shoulders of people who never quit. Willowbrook was gone now, even the name erased from county maps. But what it left behind wasn't destruction. It left awakening. Where her gate once stood, we built a small wooden bridge, no locks, no code, no restriction. Just a symbol. Across it, a plaque carved by the neighborhood kids. Home belongs to those who protect it together. Every visitor who walks that path now pauses to read it. Some smile, some tear up, but all leave with something heavier than memory. They leave with belief. Sarah still drops by on weekends. Mike brings his boat and tells the same fishing stories that somehow get longer every summer. Gladys plants flowers by the bridge every spring, wild daisies that bloom like hope reborn. And me? I've stopped calling this place the cabin. Now, it's the foundation. The heart of Operation Homecoming, where veterans and families gather to learn, to share, and to heal. Every letter we get from someone who reclaimed their home feels like another piece of that broken world finally being rebuilt. They tell me, Marcus, your story gave me courage. And I always answer the same way, no, your courage gave this story meaning. Because I learned something through all this. You can lose land, lose peace, even lose your reputation for a while, but if you never lose your truth, you'll always find your way back home. As the sun sets behind the hills, painting the lake in fire and gold, I whisper one last promise into the wind. Grandpa, I kept it safe. And I'll keep it safe for them too. And in that moment, with the water shimmering and the road behind me clear again, I finally understand, home was never about property. It was about people. It was about standing tall when others tried to make you kneel. And it was about leaving something behind that can't be taken, legacy. If this story lit something inside you, courage, peace, or a reminder that truth still matters, subscribe, share, and stay for the next story. Because every fight for home begins with someone brave enough to start it.